Sunday is the 9th anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire. With thousands of others, I will join the silent walk on Father's Day to remember the 72 people who lost their lives in an entirely preventable and foreseen tragedy, and to support families who lost parents, siblings, children in unimaginable circumstances. I know for bereaved and survivors and for our community in Kensington and Bayswater, this is always a difficult time, because 9 years on, no criminal accountability for those responsible has happened. 9 years on, the pace of change at local government and national level is too often too slow. 9 years on, the cladding crisis is still affecting hundreds of thousands around the country. So I pay tribute to all of those who continue to advocate for truth, justice and change for Grenfell, and to everyone around the country affected by this national scandal. But it would be a mistake to give up hope. The Metropolitan Police said last month that they will hand over files to the Crown Prosecution Service in September this year, and that the CPS will make charging decisions by the 10th anniversary in 2027. 20 organisations and 57 individuals could face criminal charges, and potential offences under consideration include corporate manslaughter, gross negligence manslaughter, fraud, health and safety breaches, and misconduct in public office.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Justice delayed is justice denied. It's great that the Met has now come to this position. Does my honourable friend agree with me that we should try and ensure that these cases are fast-tracked in our criminal system so that justice can now be speeded up?
Thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and she is absolutely right. We have seen in recent history where events of national significance, from Southport to recent disturbances on our streets, where the criminal justice system has moved really quickly because of the importance of showing that justice is seen to be done. And I really hope that once the CPS have made their decisions, we'll do everything we can to ensure that the court capacity is in place to deliver those trials as soon as possible. And I hope the Minister can reassure us that the investigation will continue to be fully funded, and that planning is already taking place with the judiciary and the Ministry of Justice, so that those cases are prioritised. And if those trials do take place, which I obviously hope they will be some of the most complex ever held in the UK. So I hope consideration is also given to a special court or a Nightingale-style court, which is something I know is being looked at the moment. And of course, corporate manslaughter convictions are incredibly rare, so it is essential that those responsible face the full force of the law. I also believe it's completely wrong for any company cited in the public inquiry to still be receiving public contracts. In December, I uncovered dozens of contracts with implicated companies, including 2 current NHS contracts with Ryden, the main contractor for the refurbishment, who was cited in the public inquiry. So again, I urge all public bodies to do a full audit of their contracts, including subcontractors and supply chains, and publish exactly what they find. It's good news that this government has introduced new powers to exclude companies on grounds such as professional misconduct, and now is the time for procurement officers to start using them. Of course, we have already had a public inquiry that has laid out in stark terms why the fire happened and where responsibility lies. And I'm glad that this government has accepted the recommendations in full, and important progress is being made. It is important not to forget that. The last report shows that 20 of 61 recommendations are complete and 40 are in progress. And I'm glad to see those include progress towards a single construction regulator, the expansion of product regulation, the introduction of residential personal emergency evacuation plans, the idea of a College of Fire and Rescue, and proposed changes to the statutory fire safety guidance in approved Document B. I'm also pleased that under Lord Rowe in the other place, the performance of the building safety regulator is improving, including signing off remediation works quicker. And I welcome the remediation bill in the King's Speech that I look forward to engaging on in this parliamentary session, so that we can address the outstanding unremediated buildings and also the knock-on effects, for example, crippling insurance bills for leaseholders. But while I acknowledge all this progress, there is one missing piece of the jigsaw, and that is on oversight and accountability. The online tracker for Grenfell recommendations is no doubt helpful, but Grenfell would not have happened at all if we properly learned the lessons from the Lakanal House fire in 2009 and listened to the coroner's recommendations. Instead, they sat on a shelf and an opportunity to save lives was missed. We need a proper system of tracking and following up, not just on major inquiries that get a lot of attention here, but all the inquests and investigations that lead to recommendations for change. And that's why I continue to support the idea of a national oversight mechanism as a legacy for Grenfell. On the 25th of February, the Secretary of State said in this House, in answer to my question, that work is continuing across government, including in my department, on setting up a national oversight mechanism. So I hope the Minister can provide us with an update on that work and when we can expect a decision to be made. And a mechanism like this would sit alongside the Public Accountability Bill, or the Hillsborough Law, which I hope we'll see back here soon, as landmark reforms that put power in the hands of citizens with a real duty of candour for the state, a level playing field for legal aid, and clear deterrence for misconduct in public office. In my view, if we design these well, they will lead to fewer and shorter inquiries, more rapid lesson learning by the state, and a culture shift towards openness that can contribute to rebuilding trust in politics and government in this country. And that culture shift that we need extends to the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea too. I am deeply disappointed that the first decision of the new council term last month for the Conservative leadership of the council was to remove an opposition chair of the Housing Scrutiny Committee. Since Grenfell, that position has been promised to an opposition councillor, and it's still unclear to me why or how that decision was taken. Because avoiding scrutiny, especially for this council, so culpable for the fire, is an extremely bad look. And I call on the leadership to think again and reverse that decision. Because residents in RBKC know that the council needs scrutiny. The independent regulator of social housing reported last year that the housing department is seriously failing with a C3 rating. The council has the third worst complaints record in the country. They like to say, we get the basics right. Well, surely meeting the decent home standard so that everyone can have a minimum of a safe and healthy home is a basic human right that any council should be delivering. And the Lancaster West estate surrounding Grenfell is a good example of this. The promise after the fire was for a model 21st century housing estate, and that promise is still unfulfilled. So I'm glad the government has stepped in with an additional £8 million to ensure there are no further delays to the current work, and that they will come alongside additional scrutiny on how that money is spent. And I hope the Minister can provide more details on how residents can be involved in this, including leaseholders and others, so that new oversight can be shaped by them and they have confidence in the arrangement. And I'm also pleased that we saw the extension of support to NHS services through the period of the deconstruction of the tower, where there are, of course, acute risks of mental health issues, and extended support for 5 local primary schools to provide trauma-informed education around the community. Madam Deputy Speaker, my final point is a simple one. With the passage of time, we cannot allow a return to business as usual before the fire. Already, we hear rumbles from parts of the construction industry and even, shamefully, some political parties that Grenfell is somehow responsible for the slowdown in house building, or that fire safety is a trade-off worth considering. Now, there will always be policy choices for local and national government to make, but putting life at risk should not be a trade-off we accept. So I hope we can work together with empathy and respect, something I suspect Joe Cox would have wanted, and ensure the legacy of Grenfell is that everyone in this country, regardless of class, race, geography or age, lives in a safe and healthy home.
Minister Samantha Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And firstly, I'd like to thank my honourable friend for Kensington and Bayswater for raising this really, truly important issue. The 9th anniversary of the Grenfell Tower tragedy will be, above all else, a day of remembrance, shaped by loss, by love, and by the enduring strength of this community. Can I begin by acknowledging the survivors and the relatives of those who died at Grenfell Tower? I know they have the deepest sympathies of the whole House and our most profound respect. The fire at Grenfell Tower, which claimed 72 innocent lives, was a national tragedy and a scandalous chapter in British history. We will never forget what happened that night, and we must make sure nothing like it can ever happen again. I recognise how each anniversary is intensely personal and deeply painful for bereaved families, survivors and the wider community. And I'm also struck every day by the grit and the resilience of this courageous community, not least in the way it leads the commemorations. The government will continue to be guided by the community and honour its voice. As I'm sure my honourable friend appreciates, it's right that the community shapes how the day is marked and that we stand alongside in support. I've had the privilege of meeting many members of the Grenfell community, and I carry with me a lasting impression of their strength and determination. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to acknowledge the concerns that have been raised about justice and respond to them briefly. This government recognises the importance of justice and acknowledges too that it remains a central concern for the community. In the light of recent announcements, I want to respond to those concerns. The Metropolitan Police has been investigating the Grenfell Tower tragedy since June 2017. It's one of the largest and most legally complex investigations the Met has ever conducted, with around 220 officers and staff dedicated to the investigation. Those responsible must be held to account, and we fully support the Met in their important work, which must remain independent. We also remain supportive to the wider government involvement, including the Home Office, the Ministry of Justice, and I know on a cross-government basis we're focused on ensuring that justice is served. Madam Deputy Speaker, we're mindful of this community's enduring spirit at a time of continued change at the Grenfell Tower site. This government will continue to support bereaved families and survivors and the local community, and to work with the independent Grenfell Tower Memorial Commission to create a memorial worthy of those we remember. The Grenfell Tower Memorial Expenditure Act is now in force, providing the statutory authority needed to take forward the construction of the memorial and to ensure its long-term care. The design team, Free House, is working with bereaved families, survivors and the local community to help shape the memorial. It's right that the voices of those most affected by the tragedy remain central to these decisions, guiding what comes next. The memorial will honour those who lost their lives and all those whose lives were changed forever. It will be a place for people to remember, to reflect and to pay their respects. This anniversary reminds us of our shared responsibility to honour the dead and to make sure Grenfell's legacy is shaped by those most directly affected. And it's in that spirit, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I now turn to what this government is doing to make sure that such a tragedy can never happen again. As I set out in my recent written statement to the House alongside the May 2026 Grenfell Tower Inquiry Progress Report, the tragedy exposed deep and long-standing failures in the systems that were meant to keep people safe. The loss of 72 lives was a profound and preventable failure of oversight and accountability by industry, successive governments and regulators. Bereaved families, survivors and the community continue to remind us of the human cost of those failures and of the need for lasting change. The Government has accepted the inquiry's findings and is taking forward reforms to build a stronger and more accountable building safety system. Since February 2025, we've completed 21 of the inquiry's recommendations and we remain on track to deliver all recommendations by the end of 2029. We recognise that too often inquiry recommendations have been made and accepted but not implemented, and we're determined that that will not be the case here. We're continuing to explore ways to improve transparency and accountability so the public can see the Government is following through on its commitments. We accepted the Grenfell Tower inquiry's recommendation to maintain a public record of recommendations made by inquiries. This tracker was published on gov.uk last summer and shows the progress made on implementing recommendations from 2024 onwards. It will be regularly updated and expanded to capture new inquiries as they conclude. I note my honourable friend's comments concerning the National Oversight Mechanism, and I know how important this is to the bereaved and survivors, notably Grenfell United. The Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee is also conducting an inquiry into this issue. We welcome this work and have submitted evidence to support the committee's inquiry. The Government's been clear that supplier exclusion must be carried out in line with the Procurement Act 2023 and must not jeopardise the ongoing criminal investigation. The pause doesn't prevent the Cabinet Office from resuming or undertaking future debarment investigations. In the interim, we've taken steps to stop senior officials and ministers associating with the 7 most highly criticised companies in the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 2 report. Across government, ministers and officials will no longer share platforms with these firms. As the Secretary of State set out to Parliament earlier this year, remediation remains a central priority, and in the King's speech we set out our commitment to bring forward the Remediation of Unsafe Cladding Bill, a decisive step towards fixing the cladding crisis and making sure those responsible are held to account. We'll introduce a new legal duty to remediate, requiring those responsible to identify and fix unsafe cladding promptly or risk criminal prosecution. And where they don't act, a new remediation backstop will allow a third party to step in and carry out the work. Each building made safe means fewer families left waiting and real progress in helping people move on with their lives. We'll never forget those we lost, and we remain focused on making sure that such a tragedy never happens again. Grenfell was the result of deep and widespread failings, and it's our responsibility to address them. And as we continue with these efforts, Madam Deputy Speaker, we remain firmly committed to supporting the Grenfell community. We recognise the profound impact of the tragedy on the whole community, and in particular on children and young people. Working with the Department for Education, we've provided over £800,000 in additional funding to support the physical health and emotional well-being of children and young people in schools serving the Grenfell community as the tower is carefully taken down. This is alongside a further £8 million provided by the Department of Health and Social Care to support the physical health and well-being of the community during this period. Our thoughts are also with the residents living in the community around Grenfell Tower. They deserve safe, high-quality homes. Refurbishment work on the Lancaster West estate, led by the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea and supported by further government funding, will make a real difference. That work must be shaped by the views of residents themselves. They know their community best. We expect swift progress from RBKC in response to the C3 regulatory judgment by the Regulator of Social Housing, and the regulator continues to engage intensively with RBKC on its improvement activities. I'm concerned to hear my honourable friend's comments about the change in RBK's scrutiny arrangements and will seek further advice about that. In addition, we'll continue to explore stronger and more independent oversight to make sure RBKC sets the standard of what an exemplar council should be, and that homes are delivered to the standard and at the pace people rightly expect. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I come to a close, I acknowledge that I am the latest in a long line of government ministers who has had the responsibility for the government's response to the tragedy and the recommendations from the inquiry. And I acknowledge that this is hard and difficult. So I want to pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Kensington and Bayswater, for the tenacity and the constancy that he has shown to the community he represents with such determination. As we look ahead to the future of the homes and the community around Grenfell, we are reminded once again of the strength shown in how people come together to remember, to support one another, and to make sure those lost are never forgotten. That strength must also guide us, and I pledge to this House we will continue with determination, guided by those most effective, so the legacy of Grenfell is one of lasting change.